This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, in the last of this block, helping me to explore minute 25, which runs from approximately 24 minutes as Mulder continues to talk to Agent Whitney, all the way through to 24 minutes 59 seconds as Father Joe bleeds from the eyes, his regular X-Cast guest, Russ Hugo. We did it, Russ. We're at the end of a block, and it's quite a good minute, this one, I think.
It is, yeah. My ophthalmologist is on standby, and I'm looking forward to talk about
it. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on, really, isn't there, in this one, in many respects, because yeah, you've got Father Joe falling to his knees in the snow, and he's very much like it reminds me of the beginning, you know, the opening sequence where, you know, you're cross-cutting and Joe's saying, it's here. You know, he's saying here, recounting what happened to Agent Bannon, you know, it was right here. You know, Chris Carter loves his recurring phraseology. You know, you've got the classic, this is not happening, which, you know, was riven through, particularly season 8. But yeah, it feels like that feels like an intentional dialogue choice to me, actually, in terms of what Joe's saying.
Oh, very much so. I think that's a great to connect it to the beginning there. Right after that, and I don't mean to jump ahead too far, but I'm just curious.
No,
here
fine.
We have this interplay where you're having the callback also with, which we'll get to with Exhibit, calling back to what Mulder said earlier with that same phrase like you just highlighted. But I want to kind of get your take here on Pete's delivery of the "we have to find her." This is a minor critique, but because we're digging through minute by minute, I guess we have no choice but sometimes look at some of these things. This is one of the lines where if I was a director, I might change. I might ask for a different reading. Yeah. And the reason is I feel it's more of a slight, I get a sense of irritation. I get a sense of impatience. Like, you know, we have to find her. It feels like, oh, you know, hurry up, kids, get in the car. We got to get to school, but maybe a little bit more caffeinated. Where and I get why it's done for the rhythm of the phrase itself, because it has to be repeated. It's repeated twice, so then it gets to the climax of I can't see, and then we get the eyes, and that works well. But for the character, particularly what we were talking about in the previous minute, I feel to connect to the Mulder and to connect to her situation as a leader, I would have asked, and I don't know if this is right, but I would have asked Pete to deliver that anger in an angrily sense. Like, we have to find it. Quit wasting my time in the sense of the doubt balanced with hope. Like, quit. Just tell me what you see or not. That kind of a feeling. But instead, it just feels kind of empty. So I think it was a chance to kind of emphasize where that character stands a little bit better. And it didn't really work for me. It's a minor thing, but I'm not sure about your take. What's your whole take on that whole scene between the four characters and how it builds?
Well, I think that's a really interesting observation there, really, with that line. I hadn't thought of that line in that much detail, but then when you describe it in that way, it tracks with Whitney's general, you know, frustration at what she perceives to be Joe gaslighting them all, if you like, you know. And I think so. Had it been delivered in the way you suggest, it might have had that extra firepower to it for sure, because it is very much, you know, Joe's dealing with two skeptical agents here. He's dealing with Whitney in that frustrated, you know, manner of the person in charge who wants to believe that there's something more to this, but at the same time, she's got something she's got to get done. She's got to find this woman. You know, she's determined to find this woman. Whereas Drummy is very much, when he says, Joe says, "Oh, I can't see," I can't see, and when, as Whitney's pushing him, and Drummy's like, "'Cause he's pulling it out of his ass," which is the callback, as you mentioned, to Mulder's line a few minutes ago. But that, to me, that was a real Doggett line. I thought when I heard that, I could hear Robert Patrick in my head. Maybe in the earlier point of when Doggett comes into the X-Files, you could just imagine him saying something like that in complete, doubt of something like this. Doggett would have had no time for someone like Father Joe, and that in an even more acute way than someone like Drummy does. So I think it's interesting how, you've got those two skeptics, with Mulder being the one who still wants to believe, in that. So I think, the delivery of lines is important because it is about how these characters perceive the situation, perceive Joe, perceive what Joe is apparently seeing, what he's channeling, But so, I'd not thought of Whitney's line in that way, but I'm glad you brought that up because it does make me think again.
I love the observation there about Doggett. It is completely a Doggett line. I could hear it in his accent and the delivery and all the rest, 100%. And I think Exhibit does a great job delivering it, but yeah,
he does.
You're totally on the money with that.
Yeah, it could have been him, but like you said, it would have been a very different film. But obviously, this is a great example of one of those moments in the X-Files where there's lots of possibilities that Joey's lying, that it's just all a big con job, but then something genuinely weird happens in order to maybe give what Mulder is believing or what he wants to believe a bit more credibility, which is the blood coming from Joe's eyes. Although, interestingly, when Joe is on his knees, they shot that sequence closer up in a completely different location to when he actually falls to his knees because they didn't have the natural light. They lost the natural light, so then they filmed that in a different place. You wouldn't know, to be fair, but they do intentional, more close-up shots of everybody, I think, for that reason, because it's a different space. But yeah, I think the shot of Joe lifting his eyes up and it's blood, in the eyes, which is the scene ends and we have to end the scene right at the point he lifts his head up and you see his eyes. That's the end of this minute. What do you think about this? I mean, it's quite a striking visual. I think it was in the trailer, if I remember rightly. But it is definitely one of those moments that very much, I think, positions Joe, and this is classic, Chris Carter, playing with these, religious iconographic signals, but it definitely has that feeling, doesn't it, of something rapturous going on with Joe here. Something that a bit like in when he juxtaposes aliens and God, it very much feels like he's tapping in. I mean, it felt a little bit stigmata-y, it's not stigmata obviously, but it's that idea of something quite biblical going on here with Joe.
Definitely. I think it's a clever way to add a little bit of mysticism to the film that is otherwise pretty mundane for the X-Files. I mean, not for the X-Files, but for what people might be expecting for a film. And so you do get that striking image, and you do get the connection of nosebleeds being a very constant motif in the X-Files. But this film is very closely tied to Scully. This is a Scully film, even though Mulder's there. It is about her belief more than anything. And then, of course, she's at the Our Lady of Sorrows hospital. This is a very Catholic film. Father Joe is a priest who is dealing with all of the horror of that situation and the controversy. And you have the tradition of statues that bleed. And I believe there's quite a few examples of the myths about statues bleeding from their eyes, and be able to make that connection of the psychic thing to tie that to that through line with the characters. I like the scene visually. I like the idea. I don't know if it's right because maybe if it would have been too much if they did, but for some reason, whenever I've seen the film, I keep waiting for a character to give a line to state, like, because like, well, he could have faked it. I mean, it's kind of hinted like, how would you do that trick? There's got to be a way. I mean, if Scully, this was a normal X-Files episode, Scully'd say, well, could have used food coloring. He could have had a lemon in his hand or something, something like that to go. But maybe it would ruin the rhythm. Maybe it would ruin the moment. I don't know. I don't know if it's necessary to do the traditional X-Files debunking on that scene. But it felt like it should have gone there, even if it may or may not have been the right thing to do. And I don't know, did you have any thoughts about that when you were watching it?
Well, yeah, perhaps. I think it really struck me as an intentional way of trying to bring a level of horror, religious horror, into a film that isn't, like you said, it's a quite a mundane plot line. There isn't actually a lot of supernatural stuff here, to be honest, at all. When the ultimate mystery is revealed, it's ghoulish and it is weird, but it's not necessarily massively supernatural. So it does feel like this is the channel of trying to bring that mysticism in, that much more ambiguous sense of God or something working through someone, which, there's so many X-Files episodes about that, and often ones that, revolve around Scully. You only have to look at something like Orison in season 7, which is, again, another conflicted priest having, who God or the devil might be working through or towards, all this kind of thing. So, and repeat that ad nauseum in so many different ways, in so many different episodes. So I think it is along those lines, but it feels a deliberate horror visual, deliberately designed to scare, to freak you out, blood in the eyes. It's a very simple technique. But yeah, I think having some sort of scientific rigor in there about it would have been interesting. And I think had the structure of the plot been different, had it been Mulder and Scully more conventionally investigating a story, I think you would have had that. But I don't think, by the nature of what the plot is doing, that they find it as easy to do it in this film in this way, really. But I do think it's very interesting. I think it's an interesting visual. I think it does add that extra level of mystery to Joe, really, and that level of the supernatural that I think the film does need. I think if you're going to go and see an X-Files movie, you want some really strange stuff going on, really. And I think that was part of the issue with I Want to Believe, to some extent. I think people felt that it just wasn't that strange and weird in comparison to a lot of the episodes that people had enjoyed over the years. And I think that disappointed people. So really, maybe they could have done with more of this, throughout the film, this kind of stuff. I don't know.
I think it could have helped lighten things. I mean, when you talk about some of the third rail subjects that the film touches on, in hindsight, that are problematic, some of the stuff is so grounded in the horror, particularly with Father Joe and the self-castration and all of the victims, that it's like, do you want to make it, you have to keep it somewhat dry to make it not be too exploitative, but then you think it already kind of is, particularly the two antagonists. There's, I think, not necessarily as deftly handled as some other things. So I think if you're going to have to punch in some mysticism, this is a nice way to do it. I think you could make something a little bit more, popcorn would make a more successful movie, like you're saying, with even a little bit more weirdness. But at that same sense, then they might need to dial back some of the grotesque horrors, because this is only 6 years after the Boston Globe report in the Vatican. And the film, it does wrestle with it some, but the way that it's actually engaging with the structure of the Vatican and the church is not wholly successful in that it really doesn't. Although there is some interesting stuff with the hospital Scully works at, but it's disconnected. So there's already so much in here that's there. I guess what I would have liked to see is we just had all this conflict, this wrestling between Whitney and Drummy and Mulder about, skepticism, what's going on, pull it out of your ass. We just saw something finally. I mean, that's a little bit outside of finding a body, which they could suspect he's in on it. So how would Drummy react? How did Drummy react, really, in the car ride home to seeing the eyes bleed? I'm curious what he would have done, what Whitney would have done. I think it could have added to their characters a little bit, but it also maybe just there wasn't the right time for the pacing. There could be a ton of reasons why. But I guess that's what I would have liked to see. We had that build-up, but we never really see what happens. We get the impression that they're still motivated, they're still somewhat participating, but it kind of winds down as if he becomes more of a fraud, and this is not really ever addressed by anyone other than Mulder.
No. Yeah, and I think that's a consequence of the plot going in different directions. And as you say, I think the not focusing on... They wouldn't want to focus on Whitney and Drummy necessarily as side characters, in order to keep the focus on Mulder and Scully. So, yeah, those kind of things get missed, which is a shame. But, yeah, it's one of those... It's a very interesting image to end the minute on, though. And... We'll leave this minute there, although I won't be back next time, but you will, Russ, actually, because you're taking over as host for the next block of these minutes with a whole new guest. So you may get to continue this conversation about all this.
I'll miss talking with you, though, Tony. It's been a blast, so thanks for letting me join you. And I do want to note that you have a pretty cool commentary note that I think we should mention about the blood drops while we're here.
Oh, yes.
If you feel we have time. I think that's particularly cool. And I'm giving Tony full credit for all this research. So.
Well, final point. Yeah, thank you for reminding me on this. Frank Spotnitz does say in the commentary that the blood drops on the snow are CGI. And he does apologise for the breaking of the illusion there of that whole sequence. With the fact that they're not actually real, it's not actually real blood or anything, or coming from the eyes. That's all CGI, really. But I don't think you'd know, really. I think it was well done in that sense. Yeah. I don't think you'd be. I didn't know that, until I heard him say.
And I wanted to bring that up because I think it's symbolic of the film, and that where the film is very successful and how it is by less is more. About constraint.
Yeah,
and maybe
the
eye bleeding, but the fact they could have a ton of blood, not extras, but it could have been something a little bit more dramatic. I mean, this is a summer film that I believe was released in the summer, I think. But it's just a few drops
for some reason.
And it's it's done with CG, whatever else. They could have gone over the top, and I salute them for restraining themselves. Both that backlit thing we saw in the car earlier and that there. Hey, good job, team. Good job, crew.
Yeah. I think restraint is a good thing. I'm not going to take anything away from them there. Yeah, very true, very true. Well, I'm going to restrain myself and and take my leave.
I'm the Rambler.
from I want.
I'm sorry, Tony.
I want to believe for a while. No, not at all. But I will be back later on as in a later block. But you are in good hands with Russ and his guest for the next block of episodes talking about I Want to Believe and continuing the journey. So thank you guys for sticking with us and listening. We really hope you're enjoying this minute-by-minute deep dive analysis. Please remember you can follow the show at linktr.ee/thexcast on all the social medias. So please do hop over there, talk about the show, promote it, let us know what you think as well on all those platforms. But thanks so much, Ross. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we will talk again very soon. But it's always a great pleasure to do this with you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tony. Always great. Thank you.
And you'll be back next time. I won't, but please do join us for minute 26 with Ross and a brand new guest. But until then, always remember, trust no one.